What's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I'm excited to have Monit on with us. Monit is a student that we recently worked with for the summer 2024 recruiting process, and he just finished going through it and was able to successfully come out the other side with an offer. And so I just want to get him come on here to talk to you guys about his journey so that you can kind of glean some insights on things that he did that really enabled him to be successful, and hopefully implement some of this stuff in your own process as well. So with that said, Moni, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And if you don't mind, just help us start things off by just introducing yourself real quick and helping our audience kind of get a better feel for who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Monit. I'm from Morristown, New Jersey. Grew up 20 minutes outside Philadelphia. I went to Drexel University. I'm currently a third-year student at Drexel, majoring in finance, business analytics, and MIS. And the reason I kind of wanted to go through with investment banking was just because I wanted to like push myself to the max and just like get a career path that makes most sense to me in finance, and that was investment banking. And so I started looking around and kind of led me to Wall Street Mastermind, and here I am today.
That's awesome, man. So, I guess before we kind of go any further, like the first thing that everyone always wants to know is like, where did you get an offer from, right? So, can we kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually just signed my offer last week with Wells Fargo. Really excited. So I just signed it, and now I'm going through the pairing process. So I either will end up in Charlotte or New York, but I'm really excited. Definitely wanted to work at Wells Fargo, so it all worked out.
Awesome, man. And what did it feel like when you finally got your offer?
I think that was probably the best top five feelings I ever had in my life. It was like the weight off my shoulders, just like everything was just like I can't even describe it. It was amazing.
Who
Really.
who was the first person you told?
The first person I told, my parents, obviously, they just saw me going through it the past 6 months, like grinding every day, going to classes. I also was on co-op, so then also recruiting. So everything was just like really busy. I barely got time to speak to a lot of people. But
Mm,
after I got my offer, the first person I told was my parents. They were really excited for me. That I told my mentors, the people who helped me out throughout the whole process, and it was amazing. Just having those conversations, like, "Hey, I got an offer. Like, I'm finally done recruiting," and it was the best feeling ever.
that's awesome, man. Yeah, like I mean, very few things compared to the feeling you get at the end of like a very long and stressful process where you had to work extremely hard to achieve a certain goal, and then when you finally cross the finish line, you achieve that goal. It's just like
Yeah.
it's like this is what I've been working for like for the last half a year or whatever, right? So so speaking of which, I know you joined Wall Street Mastermind, I guess 7 months ago. It was like end of November, right? It's beginning of June now. Sorry, 6 months ago. So basically 6 months ago. So you've been Wall Street Mastermind for about 6 months. Prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind, because I think when you joined, it was basically like almost at the end of your first semester of sophomore year, right? So what were you doing for recruiting prep prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind? Like, were there things you were already doing on your own? Because I don't know how early you kind of decided that you wanted to do banking, or was this like kind of the first thing that you did right off the bat?
Yeah, no. So I joined, as you said, like end of November. And so I was actually on co-op in New York City. I was working at Goldman as my second co-op from Drexel University. But prior to that, I was just really just doing whatever I can, like asking friends, hey, like how should I prepare for interviews? Who should I talk to? Who should I network with? What technical should I study? I think that was the most the important part was just technicals for me. I was like, how do I even like study technicals? I heard technicals are really insane in investment banking. And so what I was doing, I was just go online and be like, hey, let me try to figure out what accounting is. Like I really didn't have any classes in college that I took for accounting and stuff prior to this. And so I kind of looked at like the 400 questions guide, like everything that's online, the free resources, kind of use that. But I was like all over the place. I had no organization or structure, how to go about it. And so that's what kind of led me to Wall Street Mastermind. Just having that coffee chat with you really like laid out the program and how it's set up. And it was kind of easy to follow. And that's what kind of drew me towards the program.
Hmm. So a little bit more on before we talk about Wall Street Mastermind, like so you're using that 400 questions guide, which is kind of like the same guide everyone's using. How long did you kind of do that on your own for? Like, how long was that?
So yeah, I probably did it for like 2 or 3 months. but it was kind of just like me trying to memorize concepts instead of actually learning them because as I said, I really didn't take any accounting or like valuation classes in college yet. And so it's just like me trying to understand these concepts on my own, and which was really hard to understand, like trying to understand what an LBO or like something that is like your first time seeing is pretty difficult. And so when I was going through, I was like, all right, let me just like try to memorize it. And then once I would go back, I would be like, hey, I forgot what that is now. Like I wouldn't because I didn't know how to learn it. But yeah, that's exactly what I was doing before the program.
That sounds like a very common experience that a lot of people have, to be honest. You know, like roughly how many hours it took you to memorize the guide? Like, was it like how much time did you sink into it?
Yeah, so I was like kind of on and off. Like I would just one week I would kind of be on it and one week I wouldn't. But I think I spent like I would try to put like 1 hour a day towards it, but that was definitely not enough, especially because I didn't know anything. Like I actually didn't learn the concepts. I was just like trying to memorize. I was like, hey, I'll try to memorize the first 7 accounting questions. Next day I'll try to do 7 to 14, then 14 to 21. It was like no structure, but that's what I was doing. I was like, if I do a little chunk by day, look, I'll help out. But it was kind of just me trying to memorize, which really didn't make sense.
So an hour a day on and off for 2 to 3 months, basically. So
Yeah.
it was like a good amount of time, basically.
It
Like,
was definitely a good amount of time. Like I was pretty set like on investment banking, but I just didn't know how to like full approach it.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, 2 to 3 months, that's 8 to 12 weeks. Even if you only did it every other week, it's 4 to 6 weeks of hour a day. Yeah, that's a lot of time. So okay, so then let's talk about Wall Street real quick because you start to allude to this already a little bit, but I'm curious, like, I guess how did you find Wall Street Mastermind, and also like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind? Because like obviously, at this point we've coached more and more students over time. We're almost approaching 1,000 students at this point, in fact, but that's over a period of 5+ years, right? And so like not everyone chooses to do something like this. And so like what made you say like, okay, rather than continue to do more of what I've been doing, which is what most other people are doing around me, like I'm gonna take this different path and do something different. Like what made you want to do that? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh yes. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so what I was doing wasn't obviously working. First, just I knew I was not like competitive. I was coming from a non-target school, Drexel University. Don't really have a lot of bankers going in the program. Like every year, we probably have around like 4 to 5 people going into investment banking out of our whole business school, which is like nothing compared to like other Ivy League kids or like UPenn or other schools like that. But I knew I was at a disadvantage in that part. But secondly, what I was doing didn't really like make sense. I was only like using that guide and I was forgetting about the whole concept of networking, which is really big in investment banking. And so I was like, all right, let me search around. Let's see what other programs are out there. And I saw a lot of my friends were doing Wall Street Mastermind. I had 2 people from my school do it, and they were kind of talking to me about the program, and also saw a lot of ads online. I was like, all right, is this like one of those scam programs, or is it like actually worth doing? Because I was like, all right, I'm going to be paying for this out of my pocket. That was another thing I was going to go through, like finances. And so I went through it. I had that coffee chat with you. And the biggest thing that kind of drew me towards the program, I'd say just the organization and structure of the program, just like how everything was set up. And like if you just follow the program like exactly how it's set up, like you're gonna get an offer, but you just got to put in the work, you got to put in the hours. But everything is like laid out in front of you. All you gotta do is follow it. And so that's what kind of drew me towards just like that organization part.
Got it. Okay. So you actually pay for this entire thing on your own. Like you didn't even rely on your parents.
Nope. And that was probably the biggest concern I was gonna have because I was on co-op in New York City, so I was like, all right, I gotta save money for like my expenses, my rent, and also want to pay for this program. How's that all gonna work out? But you were pretty flexible in that sense, and like you kind of just made everything a lot easier. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, look, we always try to be as flexible as we can with the students that we want to work with. So, um, that's awesome, man. So, okay, so you're primarily drawn to the structure of the program and how organized it is, and I think something you said that's very key, which is like everything's laid out for you. you just gotta come in and you just gotta do the work. Obviously, I think like I always like to emphasize that because I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think like, oh, like, if I pay for Wall Street Mastermind, I'm just gonna come in and like this job's just gonna, fall into my lap, and be handed to me on a silver platter. Like that's not how this works, right? But like obviously you come in, you still have to work you still have to work very hard. It's just that before you might have worked very hard and you might not have gotten an offer regardless, versus now you put in the same amount of effort, you work just as hard, and you actually have something to show for it. And that's a big difference, right? So I guess let's talk about how you made that happen then, because you come in to Wall Street Mastermind right at the end of November, and that was like right around when a lot of applications are starting to, about to start open up, right? And so like walk us through kind of the last 6 months, like this journey that you've been on. Um, what has that been like? What did you do once you came into Wall Street Mastermind, and like how is it different than what you were doing before? And like what were some of the things that you felt like were the most impactful or like made the biggest difference for you?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. The past 6 months were definitely, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, was definitely hard. It was a lot of stress, a lot of like hours put into it, a lot of hard work. But I'd say it was all rewarding at the end because I knew if I was gonna put in this much work, I had to come out with something. So I was always optimistic. I was like, all right, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. That's how I kind of thought about the whole process. But going into it, I was like in the trenches, like in November, December, January, February. Those were like the months where I was in the trenches and probably the most stressful months I've ever had in my life. But in terms of just like the whole recruiting process, starting in November, that's when I was starting to go through the modules, like learning the technicals, like actually learning them instead of memorizing them. So like actually learning accounting concepts, actually learning valuation concepts, actually learning what a DCF is instead of just being like, all right, what is a DCF? Instead of memorizing, I was actually learning what it is and how it like all like everything, all the technicals, they all go together somehow. And I didn't really understand that till I actually joined the program. And that's part of the structure organization part I was talking about. The structure has. So the first few, I think December, January, February, I was like going through the technicals, kind of mastered all that. But at the same time, I was also networking, which was another big thing I got out of the whole program, which is the networking aspect and really knowing how to network, how to speak with these bankers, how to set up coffee chats, what to say in these coffee chats. I think that's something that's really not emphasize that much. Like, all right, you're networking, but what are you actually networking? How are you networking? Right. And so I think from January, February, those were the 2 months that I networked heavy because that's when I learned all my technicals. So I had my technicals down, and that's exactly when the applications were opening up. As you said, January, February, that's when all these banks were opening up. A lot of interviews were going out. And so I started networking. I think I was doing around like 10 to 15 calls a week. And that's the same time I was also working full time at Goldman in New York City. So I was trying to figure out, all right, on my lunch break, I'll have two coffee chats. Maybe when I get back from work, I'll have another two coffee chats. So really being on top of your stuff, I think you really need to have your organization down, like knowing how to set time out. So I really started utilizing my calendar. Prior to this, I really never used my calendar or set up reminders. And so I guess that's something I still use today. So it's not just for IB prep or IB recruiting. I still, even to this day, when I got back to campus, I started using my planner, my calendar. And so I definitely got those two skills out of this program too. But I'd say around, I think March, April, May, that's when I was hearing back from a lot of banks like, hey, you have a first round interview with this, blah, 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 blah. And so those were the times where I was getting the interview. So interview prep was around March, April, and then May is when I obviously got my Wells offer, and then that was the best feeling ever. I was done with it, and I look back at the whole process. I think I've grown a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going through a process like investment banking recruiting, regardless of what the outcome is, like if you actually put like a like a real effort into this process, like you don't really have a choice but to grow, right? Because think about when you think about growth, like what has to happen in order for us to grow as people? It's kind of like going to the gym, right? Like I mean, you and I were talking about this before we started recording this, was like you go to the gym and you work out and you try to get bigger, and the way you get bigger is by putting more strain on your muscle and doing that like resistance training. It's not like sitting at home on a couch where you're super comfy and there's no strain whatsoever, right? And same thing with investment banking recruiting. It's like it's such a stressful process, and there's so much you have to juggle. And to your point earlier, like you learn how to. It sounds like part of what you're saying is you actually became a lot better at managing your time. Part of that through like using your calendar and things like that. And it's like that's that's such an important skill. That's like a life skill that if you anyone who's successful that I know anyway, they have to be extremely good at managing their time because just like most successful people are very busy. And if you're going to be busy and you can't manage your time well, like you're probably not going to be successful, right? And so, and I think also like investment banking and recruiting builds character, right? Because like, yeah, you got the offer in the end, but before you got the offer, it's like you probably had to go through like so many rejections, right? Which is actually totally normal. Like for most people, you have to go through multiple rejections first before you get that first offer. I'm not saying everyone, but like for most people. And a lot of people, especially a lot of students, at least we see this, a lot of college students who are trying to get into investment banking, they've done pretty well for the most part their entire life. Like growing up, like they've almost always achieved what they wanted. They've always gotten what they wanted. They haven't really had that many like real setbacks. And you can tell when someone is like has a positive attitude and is good at dealing with those setbacks. Like you mentioned something earlier that stood out to me, which is like your whole mentality was like, hey, I knew if I was going to put in this much work, I was going to come out the other side with something, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, which is like a very positive way to think about it. Versus like I know some people like they start rejections start to pile up, and then they start to kind of question themselves, like, oh, like maybe I'm not cut out for finance, maybe this is not for me, maybe I should just give up, maybe I should go for something easier. And like that's a very normal reaction too. But a lot of times that difference in mindset is kind of what separates the winners from the losers. Right. And so that's what I mean by it's like it builds character. Like by the time you come out the other side, it's like because you've never done anything this hard before, you just learn so much from the process. Both like in terms of hard skills, like yeah, learning, the technical concepts and things like that. Like, yes, you grow that way too, but also on the soft skill side or like at a personal level, I feel like there's a lot of development that happens as well. Right.
Yeah, no, totally agree with all that.
So I guess if I double click into a couple of the other things that you said in terms of what you were doing over the last 6 months. So one of the things you said was like you actually learned the technical concepts instead of just memorizing it, right?
Yep.
Because everything the technical all the technical concepts are kind of connected together somehow. Like they kind of had dependencies on each other, and um, the difference between someone who's just memorizing answers to questions versus someone who actually learns it, a lot of times is about like connecting the dots, right? It's like, okay, how do the three statements feed into the valuation concepts? And then like, how does the valuation concepts affect like M&A deals, right? And then like, if you're doing M&A deal, what's the difference between like a standard M&A deal versus like a leverage buyout? Both are M&A, but like they're different, right? And so it's like all these things kind of build on top of each other, and most people don't connect those dots, and then so they don't see like the whole picture, and it doesn't really make sense. I guess what people are probably curious about though is like what was like really the difference that allowed you to go from originally not connecting those dots and just memorizing answers to say the 400 questions to eventually actually connecting those dots, and then like it's almost like having everything click and having that aha moment, like what was the difference that allowed you to go from here to here?
Yeah, so the difference, I think I touched on it a few times, just that organization part and how the technical modules are broken up. So it's like broken up like first learning accounting and then maybe DCFs, valuation, and then LBOs. Like it's all chronologically ordered and it all made sense at first. I was like, hey, why is it ordered in this way? And then once I actually finished the whole like module, the whole technical module, it all made sense because like first of all, accounting is like the backbone of everything in investment banking. And so learning that first is definitely like the first that's a correct thing to do because it all ties all the concepts together. And so I guess that organization part is really what kind of made the whole technical module made sense for me because prior to that It was just like one day, hey, maybe I'll learn LBOs today, and then next day I'll learn accounting. But like, why would you want to go from LBOs to accounting instead of going from accounting to DCFs, valuation, then LBOs? Like, I think that structure is what made all the modules and all the concepts make sense because I remember a lot of my interviews, especially for Wells, it was actually pretty technical. It wouldn't just be like, hey, what is a DCF? It's like they're going in detail. And so actually knowing how a DCF works is really critical because if I didn't know like the ins and outs of a DCF, I probably wouldn't have got the offer. Because in a lot of these interviews, especially today, they know that a lot of kids are probably looking at the guides. So they're not gonna just ask you, hey, $10 depreciation. Hey, they might ask you that, but they're gonna ask you a lot more questions too, like follow-ups maybe, and you should always be prepared for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Which is, I think like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and maybe 5 years ago, like it was still fine if you just memorized a lot of these answers. But because that's been going on for so long and everyone's been doing that, including a lot of your interviewers today, when they came up, they were also doing that. Now it's so widespread that everyone's just memorizing the same guides. There's only like 2 or 3 guides out there that everyone reads. Your interviewers know. I mean, they themselves have read those guys and they know the exact questions that you're memorizing. And they kind of figured out that, hey, if we just ask everybody the same questions from the same guys, then everyone's gonna have the answers memorized, and we're not gonna be able to tell who actually is better and who's worse, right? And so that doesn't really serve their purpose. And then so now they're deliberately going out of their way, like you said, to not ask those just the exact questions in those guides. And we see this because we have like that interview questions database where everyone submits all the questions that they got into the database, and so we're seeing in real time what questions are people are actually being asked. And then when we look at those questions, and when we compare that to what's in the guides, it's like questions are starting to get harder, right? And that's actually just the way that life works. It's like things continue to get harder and harder over time. Things continue to get more competitive. Like it's harder today to get into a great college than it was 10 years ago. It's harder today to get into a great business school than it was 10 years ago. It's harder today to get in banking than it was 10 years ago because your competition is getting better too, right? And there's more information out there and everyone's more prepared and everyone knows more. And so like you still have to figure out a way to like differentiate yourself or like stand out from everybody else. And usually the way to stand out from everybody else is not gonna be like to just do the same things that everyone else is doing, right? But I think like the other point you made about like the order of operations, I think that's really key too, which is no matter what you're doing in life, like if you want to be good at something, most of the things that you're trying to be good at, like the order of operations is really important. Even like something as simple as like baking a cake. Like I can give you the recipe and say, hey, these are all the ingredients. But if I don't give you instructions on like what to put in first, what order to mix these things in, whatever, how much of each thing to do, and you're just like putting in these ingredients in random orders, like your cake is probably not going to come out right. Right. And so it's the same things like for technicals, like, yeah, we know all the different possible concepts that you could get tested on. It's accounting, it's valuation, it's M&A, it's LBOs. Like there aren't that many different concepts that you really need to know, but you do need to learn them in the right order, right? Because if you don't, then a lot of it won't make sense, right? And I think like the last point I'll add to that is, I think the biggest difference between someone who's like straight up trying to memorize versus someone who's like actually like learning the concepts is that when you're trying to memorize questions, there's technically an infinite number of questions that you're going to have to memorize because even the same question, I can change up the numbers, right? Or I can like change any one like part of the question slightly. It's like, instead of like, hey, there's $100 increase in depreciation, I say, okay, now it's $100 increase in inventory. Now what happens? It's like, then that's a totally different question, right? And so like, if you think about memorizing answers to specific questions, there's an infinite number of questions that they could possibly ask you, which means you're never going to be done. Like you're never going to finish. But if you're actually learning the concepts, the underlying concepts, there's a finite amount of concepts that you need to learn, right? Again, like we already said, the 4 main categories are accounting, valuation, M&A, and LBO. There's 4 buckets of concepts you need to learn, and that's much easier to do because there is an end in sight, and when you've learned all these things and you actually understand it, right? And actually the way is like when you can actually teach these things to other people, right? So I think those are really, really great points that you made. On the networking side, did
Mhm.
you network at all prior to coming into Wall Street Mastermind, or like only after you came in?
So yeah, I didn't really know how to network, I'll be honest. I was like, all right. I would just ask my dad, hey, do you know anyone like family friends that might be in investment banking? And I also just hit up any of my friends who are in banking, like, hey, I was call up my cousin. I had one cousin in banking. I had some family friends in banking. Just call them up, be like, hey, I'm really interested in investment banking. How should I go about it? And that's pretty much all I did. And I'll try to get all the information I could from them and any like resources they would have. But I think that was not enough at all. That did not really help me much. But going into the program, you really laid out how to network and what to like network for. Like at the end of the day, networking comes down to you're trying to just get that interview, right? When I was going into networking, I was like, all right, I'm going to network so they can give me an offer. They're not going to give you an offer. Like, how is an analyst is going to give you an offer? That doesn't work like that. But just going into the program, it really gave me a sense of like what questions to ask, who to talk to. Like you want to talk to MDs, you want to talk to VPs, you want to talk to like pretty much everyone, but you kind of want to focus on the big dogs too. But it really got me like really good organization or like a structure of how to network, which was really important. That's what I was missing prior to joining the program, I guess.
Gotcha. And so you didn't just network with like really junior folks, you networked with junior people all the way up to like managing directors, basically.
Yeah, so at first I was kind of scared. I would just talk to like analysts, is like, all right, they're closer to me in age, and I can really strike a good conversation. Maybe talk about sports, maybe just talk about college life. So that's what I was doing at first, like the first month. That's what I kind of did with networking, and quickly figured out wasn't getting much traction. I was like, all right, where's my interview? Like all my friends were getting interviews. Like, where's my interview at? Like I'm putting in just as much work, but the biggest part was I was talking to analysts. So I quickly just changed up the whole game. I was like, all right, I'm just going to shoot out emails to MDs, VPs. I might not even know them. I'm just going to cold email them. And yeah, the hit rate might not been really good, but one or two of them responded. And like, that's all it takes. There's one or two MDs that respond. And these are the people who carry the most weight. And so having a conversation with like MDs, VPs, and even associates sometimes, that's really changed the game for me. And that's what kind of led me to get more interviews, like first round interviews and eventually super days. And so I started changing up the whole game after I realized you got to talk to like pretty much everyone, not just analysts.
And you got most of your interviews from doing that.
Yeah, so a lot of my interviews that I did get was pretty much from the big dogs, like MDs and VPs, like them emailing, just hopping on a phone. They're like, "Hey, we really like your conversation. Let's set up another call. Let's maybe grab a coffee." Because I was also in New York City, so I kind of played that to my advantage, and so I actually got to go to some of these offices and like some of these coffee shops in the Manhattan area, and so it was pretty awesome. Just really being in New York City and also get to see these people in person. I'd say that was pretty important too, just like that face to face interaction.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Was there, I guess, just one last question on Wall Street. So obviously you learn all the technicals, which was like probably the most important thing for you coming in. You obviously learned how to network a lot better. That enabled you to get the interviews. So if you're able to get interviews and you're able to pass the interviews, then obviously you kind of have like everything you need to get the offer, right? I guess one really common question that a lot of people have with people who haven't gone through the program is that because it's hard for them to visualize what it actually is like to go through the program. And so like the question we always get is like, well, what's the biggest difference between doing it as part of this program versus if I just try to self-study everything on my own? What would you say to that? Like, what if you had to pinpoint like one thing, like what would you say is the biggest difference between these two approaches?
Yeah, so prior to joining the program, I remember, I would always have a lot of questions. Like, I didn't really know who to reach out to. I would be like, hey, how does this like concept work? Like, how does like a $10 increase in debt like impact the three statements? Like, I'll try to search it online, but some of these answers would have like conflicting answers. I'll be like, whose answer should I like trust? And so that was another thing. Just like I would always have a lot of like questions around technicals, even just like networking, just like who can I ask like for help? And so when I joined the program, that was I think I didn't touch on this point yet. Just having like that whole community of people that are also recruiting with you in Wall Street Mastermind, the Wolf Pack, just like they're on your side, just like dropping questions into your Slack channel. You have coaches, so people that are always there to mentor you and answer your questions like 24/7. Like I remember I would drop in some questions after work around like 11 p.m., maybe at midnight, and I'd get like a response back in like maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, like within an hour. So just having that community aspect was I think my biggest thing I could have ever asked for during recruiting, because I remember I was lost like a lot of times. I'd probably be lost like every week. I was like, all right, how do I do this? How do I do that? But just like having like a community of people that are also recruiting with you, not just like viewed as your competition, but people who are actually there to help you. Like you guys are going through the same stuff together, so might as well like lean on each other. And so that's exactly what I did. Like I would set up mock interviews with a lot of people in the program. And that was not just like I would actually like today, I'm actually texting a few of them like on a weekly basis. So like we actually became buddies after this program. And so having that wolf pack was definitely something I took out of this program, and just having that structure, just like everything's laid out in front of you. All you gotta do is put in your hours. Like go in, clock in every day, just put in your hours, you're gonna get an offer. Like it's guaranteed to happen.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, like the community is actually a lot of people don't realize it, but it's a huge aspect of this program, right? It's like it's the network effect of having all these people that are going through it with you at the same time, or maybe who have already gone through it and they're ahead of where you're at, and they're also helping you out as well and kind of paying it forward. And um, it just makes what's like a typically a very lonely process a lot more bearable, I guess, right? Because that's honestly like there's no other way to put it. Like recruiting is a very lonely process, right? So I guess last question for you. Like now that you're on the other side, what is like the best piece of advice that you can give our audience, like primarily people who are maybe still going through recruiting or who are thinking about going to recruiting, like they haven't started, but they're going to be doing in the future. Um, maybe someone who's in a similar position as you, like they go to a non-target school that doesn't really send that many people into investment banking each year. Like, was there anything that either someone shared with you while you were recruiting, or maybe you figured it out on your own that you feel like really made a big difference for you?
Yeah, so great. That's a great question. So yeah, obviously I'm from a non-target school, Drexel University, and so I knew I was already like a leg back behind a lot of people. Like all these target schools, they're gonna have an easier process because their schools more known, especially for Drexel. Like we, as I said, we only send like maybe like 5 to 8 people each year into investment banking out of the whole business school, which is really small. But that number is obviously increasing today. But the biggest piece of advice that I could give, especially come from a non-target, is just like you're gonna have to work your tail off. You're gonna have to work twice as hard. Just having that underdog mentality. That's exactly what I had throughout this whole process. Just I knew I had to put in the work. And this program literally has everything you need at your fingertips. All you gotta do is put in the hours. Everything's like laid out. You have your behaviorals, like what to expect in terms of behavioral questions, technicals, how to network. You have the whole community with you. All you got to do is put in 70, 80 hours, just put in that work, and you're going to get it offered. Just as I said before I started this whole thing with Sam, just there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? He's got to go through it. There's going to be light. He's got to find it. I remember during like my second, third month into the program, I was like going through the trenches. It was really stressful. I didn't know like if I was going to get an offer. I was optimistic, and that's like totally normal. Like I was really conflicted at times. I was like, all right, I'm probably not going to get an offer. I just got rejected by 15 banks in the span of 1 week. Like it's over for me. But like at the end of the day, I just kept going. I was like, all right, I'm gonna get rejected. I get rejected. Like they don't know me, I don't know them, but I just kept going, and then eventually, a few months in, I got rejected more. But I think I got rejected like 18 times, like no
Wow,
interviews, and then I finally got like a super day. I was like, all right, I have 2 super days. If this is the only 2 opportunities I have, I'm gonna go kill it. And so what I did was I just like clocked off of social media, put my phone to the side, and those 3 days I just prepared like a dog for the super days, and got an offer from Wells, and life is good now.
that's awesome, man. Look, I always tell people this: like, all you need is one offer, right? If you really think about how many banks there are out there that you could be going after, like if I even just think of all the bulge bracket elite boutique and like highly reputable middle market banks, like it's at least 50 firms. So you just need one, right?
Yeah.
And so like 18 rejections is a lot. And then by the way, I got to give you props because I went through that myself when I was recruiting for banking, and I feel like one thing that really set me apart from a lot of other people wasn't because I was smarter. I wasn't because I was harder working. I don't think I was that either. I was hardworking, but I think a lot of people are hardworking. It wasn't because I was like better at interviewing. It's funny because now I coach students on how to interview, but back then in college, like I sucked at interviewing. Like honestly, I was bad. And so it wasn't any of those things, but it was actually just like my ability to like take rejection, like fall down and then get back up and keep going. And just like I keep getting knocked down and I keep getting back up. I keep getting knocked down, I keep getting back up. It's like, in a boxing fight, like that guy that just won't go down, right? And to be honest, most people are not like that. Like, and I see it too now, even because especially I'm coaching so many students, but even back then too, like a lot of my peers, like you see people start to get like, okay, 1 or 2 rejections is fine, keep going. Like start to get 4 or 5 rejections. Okay, now doubt's starting to creep in a little bit. After like 7 or 8 rejections, and then like, oh shit, like maybe this is not for me, right? Like 12 rejections, they're like, all right, I'm gonna wave the white flag, like I definitely can't do this, right? And then so like you got 18 rejections and that didn't stop you, right? I myself got over 20 rejections when I was recruiting for banking because I did summer recruiting, didn't get a return offer, then I had to recruit again for full time, and that was extremely hard. And that was back in 2008 also. So I got so many rejections, and really I just think like I just outlast everyone else because I wouldn't
Yeah.
take no for an answer. And sometimes like you need to have that persistence
Yeah.
and that resilience and that dog in you to like
Yeah.
just keep going, right? And so I think that's like mental toughness is such an important quality, right? I have this book up here, the 177 traits of like the mental what is it, 177 mental toughness secrets of the world class. It's a good book.
Yeah.
I think that's something that a lot of people lack, right? And then the other thing that you said is like, hey, everything at your fingertips, if you just put in, I mean, for you, you put in, it sounds like 70 to 80 hours of work. Like if you just put
Yeah.
in the work, you're gonna get there, right? And I think that's also like really that's really helpful too, because I think a lot of times the reason why people struggle, or the reason why people give up is because they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Like they don't know how much more work is it gonna take. Like if I just keep going, if I just keep doing more of this, and this shit sucks. I keep getting rejected and it hurts. And am I ever gonna come out the other side, or like is it even worth it? Versus like if you know there's like an end to this, then it's like psychologically it's easier to push through to the end because you're like, okay, just a little bit more, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'll eventually get there. And if you
Yeah.
actually think about 70, 80 hours, it's like, is that a lot of work? Like, yes and no, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's 70, 80 hours of work. Like, but like, no, as in like, if you think about it, if you were working a full-time job, that's 40 hours a week. That's
Yeah.
about
Exactly.
2 weeks worth of work on the
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're saying, hey, you had to invest 2 weeks of a full-time job equivalent into something that's going to get you your dream job, that's something that's going to set you up for the rest of your career for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Take it anytime.
Like, is that a lot of time? Like, not really, right? Like, you do 1 or 2 hours a day consistently, like, you'll be done in, 1 or 2 months,
Exactly.
right? So, I think that's really, really great advice. Like, for those of you who are maybe going through the process now, maybe you're a non-target school student, maybe you feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and maybe you're just like, I've spent so much more time. Maybe some of you even already spent more than 70 or 80 hours because maybe your approach is not right. Maybe you're like trying to memorize all the questions, and there's so many questions and you're just like not getting it. Like there's a better way, right? And so like if that sounds like you, I want to encourage you guys to reach out to our team, schedule a call. You go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do is we'll hop on a call with you and we'll just talk about your situation, learn more about what it is that you're currently trying to do, what kind of offers you are hoping to get, what you feel like you're needing help with, and to get from where you are today to where you're trying to go. And then depending on what you tell us, like we'll give you our best advice possible and come up with like a customized game plan for you and walk you through what we think needs to happen. And then like if you want to go and do that on your own, or if you want to do that, with our help, like either or is fine. But at a minimum, you're gonna have a better game plan moving forward for how to accomplish your goals, right? So if that's something you guys are interested in, go ahead and go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The streets abbreviated to ST, so it's wall ST mastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. So with that said, Moni, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on here with us today and just kind of share with us kind of like step by step how you went through your journey and how you're able to come out the other side successfully. And I think this will be very inspirational for a lot of our audience who also go to non-target schools who maybe feel like they can't do this. And that's what it's all about, man. So I want to congratulate you again on getting a really, really awesome offer at Wells Fargo. And, you know, I'm excited to see what you accomplish, you know, next summer, whether that's in New York City or in Charlotte. So definitely keep us posted.
I know, we'll do it. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up here for this one, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. But until next time, all right, talk soon.